It is 1:49 p.m. Just 12 minutes since Alaska Airlines Flight 261 took off from Puerto Vallarta. They are now at 23,400 feet, climbing toward their target altitude of 31,000 feet. A few minutes have passed since the autopilot was engaged when something unusual catches the pilot's attention. A warning light has illuminated on their panels, signaling them to disengage the autopilot. The aircraft has detected an issue, and they must continue the flight manually. January 31st, 2000. It is 1:15 p.m. in Puerto Vallarta, and Alaska Airlines Flight 261 is about to receive clearance to taxi to the runway. The aircraft is an MD-83 with 26,000 flight hours, built in 1992. The MD-80 series are short and medium-range aircraft manufactured by McDonnell Douglas between 1979 and 2000, which became part of Boeing in 1997. Among the major U.S. airlines, Alaska Airlines has perhaps charted the most unusual course throughout its long history. It began as a regional airline in Alaska, and when deregulation came in the late 1970s, it only had one destination outside of Alaska's 49 states. However, over the next 2 decades, Alaska Airlines pursued an aggressive expansion strategy, aiming to become an affordable option for travelers throughout the western United States. It added dozens of new routes, expanded into a large number of new cities, and even introduced services to Mexico to balance the seasonal nature of its flights to Alaska. By the late 1990s, what was once a small regional airline had successfully transformed into one of the largest airlines in the United States. At the helm of Flight 261 is the experienced Captain Ted Thompson, 53 years old, with 17,750 flight hours, including over 4,000 in MD-80 aircraft. Alongside him is First Officer Bill Tansky, 57 years old, with 8,140 hours of experience. Additionally, the MD-83 will carry 3 more crew members and 83 passengers. In total, there are 88 people aboard the Alaska Airlines flight. At 1:37 p.m., the plane begins taxiing to the runway. They take off smoothly and start their journey toward their final destination in Seattle. It will be a medium-range flight, taking just over 5 hours to complete. But only 12 minutes into the flight, problems begin for Flight 261. They are at 23,400 feet when a warning light illuminates in the cockpit, indicating they must disengage the autopilot because something is malfunctioning and causing issues with the plane. The moment they disconnect the autopilot, the pilots immediately realize what the problem is. Almost as soon as they release the autopilot button, the aircraft begins to descend sharply. The pilots quickly stabilize the plane using the manual controls and start investigating. They are experiencing some kind of problem with the horizontal stabilizer. They attempt to adjust it manually, but to no avail. The stabilizer's position causes the plane to descend unless they keep pulling back on the controls. If they let go for even a moment, the aircraft would continue to drop. They check the technical and mechanical manuals and try every procedure listed, but the stabilizer does not respond. They contact their airline to speak with a mechanic for additional guidance, but all they receive is confirmation of what they had already read in the manuals. That the plane had passed its last inspection just 30 days ago and was in perfect condition. The anxiety starts to mount. The pilots attempt everything in the manuals every 3 to 4 minutes, but without warning, the aircraft is forced downward with much more power than during the first scare. The plane tilts violently, and in just a few seconds, it descends over 2,000 feet. Alarms blare in the cockpit as the aircraft accelerates. The pilots struggle to regain control until, just as suddenly, the plane stabilizes once again. The speed remains a concern, and the force needed to pull back on the controls to keep the aircraft level is immense. The pilots take turns every few seconds to maintain control. By 4 p.m., the pilots contact Los Angeles ATC, urgently requesting clearance to fly between 15,000 and 21,000 feet, as they are unsure at which altitude they can maintain stability. At the same time, Captain Thompson tries to explain the situation to the passengers.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are experiencing some mechanical issues with the plane and will attempt an emergency landing at Los Angeles Airport in approximately 20 to 30 minutes. We apologize for the inconvenience. Please keep your seatbelts fastened at all times.
Although he tried to be as transparent as possible with the passengers, both the captain and first officer knew that landing the plane in these conditions would be extremely difficult. They altered their route to avoid flying over populated areas, choosing instead to fly over the Pacific Ocean. If things went wrong, at least they wouldn't crash into buildings or cities. They continued to fight the aircraft for several more minutes until they heard a loud crack from the tail section. One second later, it became impossible to keep the plane airborne. It began plummeting again at high speed. The pilots tried everything for several seconds, but the plane's speed increased and it started spiraling. Meanwhile, ATC sought confirmation from a nearby plane to corroborate what they were seeing on their radar screens. In a desperate move, the captain attempted to fly the plane inverted, hoping that the stabilizer, which was pushing them toward the ocean, would instead lift them back toward the sky. But it was an impossible maneuver. Moments later, the plane crashed into the ocean at a speed nearing that of sound, shattering into thousands of pieces. None of the 88 people on board survived. What had happened? What was the problem with the MD-83 stabilizer? The investigation was conducted by the NTSB, and once the plane's parts were recovered, the problem was quickly identified. The pilots had clearly described it over the radio, so the investigation focused on the horizontal stabilizer. When they examined the parts that operated the stabilizer, investigators were stunned by the severe wear. The jackscrew was completely surrounded by a metallic thread, which turned out to be the inner lining of the nut through which the large screw moves up and down. Essentially, the screw had completely destroyed the nut's threading, preventing it from moving and locking it in a position that forced the plane downward. This required the pilots to constantly pull on the controls to keep the aircraft level. The pilots tried to free the jackscrew throughout the flight in an effort to restore normal control, but these attempts ultimately proved fatal. According to the NTSB's findings, having lost all its threading, the jackscrew eventually became completely dislodged from the nut, causing the plane to lose all stability and plummet uncontrollably into the Pacific Ocean. The jackscrew is one of the few components in the MD-80 series without a redundant backup in the event of a failure. As such, it's critically important that the jackscrew is kept in good working condition. primarily through frequent and thorough greasing at regular intervals. However, during Alaska Airlines' period of rapid expansion, the company also cut costs, resulting in a reduction in mandatory jackscrew lubrication from every 500 flight hours to approximately every 2,250 hours. Eventually, one of these jackscrews became completely stuck, leading to the tragedy of Flight 261. A special inspection conducted by the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, in April 2000 revealed significant deficiencies in Alaska Airlines' maintenance practices, which the FAA should have discovered earlier. The investigation concluded that the FAA's oversight of Alaska Airlines had been inadequate for several years. The NTSB noted that by July 2001, a team from the FAA determined that Alaska Airlines had corrected the deficiencies previously identified. Both Captain Thompson and First Officer Tansky were posthumously awarded the Airline Pilots Association's Gold Medal for heroism. In the 2012 movie, Flight, starring Denzel Washington, an air accident involving a plane similar to an MD-83 is depicted. In the movie, investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board determined that the likely cause of the accident was the fatigue of a horizontal stabilizer jackscrew due to excessive wear and poor maintenance. In the film, the plane attempts to fly inverted, similar to the final moments of the real-life crash, although in reality, the plane did not stabilize while inverted as portrayed in the movie. Screenwriter John Gatins explained that the film was loosely inspired by the events of Alaska Airlines Flight 261,